Hi guys, welcome. Go home data, you're drunk. I am really super excited about this one. Our speaker today is a teacher at General Assembly. In her past life, she was a product design manager at Facebook, and she led the UX team at Hot Studio, a design consultancy in San Francisco. Over her career, she has found inspiration in collaboration, helping companies large and small embrace new technologies, divine product strategies, and craft approaches to great user experiences. She founded and also sits on the board of directors for IXDA San Francisco, which stands at over 4,000 members. And if that's not enough, she also raises children and chickens. Ladies and gentlemen, Danielle Malik.
Thank you. You can hear me okay? All right, great. Thank you very much for coming to see me. I know you had a lot of great choices for this slot, and a little too much feedback here. All right. I know you had a lot of great choices for this, so I appreciate it. I was really excited to put this talk together today and give you all my ideas about data. But I also kind of want to make a disclaimer at first, is that I'm in a little bit weird headspace right now, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but everyone's been so warm and welcoming here that I feel like I can tell you guys I'm in a bad relationship with this guy named Data. And, he seemed like a really nice guy at first, super smart, good looking in kind of a nerdy way. Not so great at parties, but, you can't have everything. And we were really hitting it off. We'd have these great conversations. It just made me see the world in a whole new way. But over time, he got more and more controlling. Like, always wanted to have a say in all of my decisions. He would monopolize every conversation and always had to have the last word. And the worst was the way he infiltrated my social circles. And after a while, people didn't want to see me unless I was with him. So, things were getting really bad, and I thought we were going to have to call it quits. But we did decide to stay together for the baby. And now we're in therapy, and it's really effective. I'm learning a lot about him, about me, about how we can work together and have a stronger relationship, all of which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Okay, so Data is not really my boyfriend. It's more of a friends with benefits situation. But really, this isn't far from what it feels like for me sometimes, this kind of love-hate relationship I have, a little bit of push and pull. Can't live with him, can't live without him. I've been a UX designer for about 15 years, so now at General Assembly, before that at Facebook, and many other positions as designer, director over my career. And even 5 years ago, data was not that prevalent in our industry. I mean, sure, there were analytics tools out there, but you had to be a company of a certain size to even bother with them. And then they were mostly used for marketing efforts. But these days, data is everywhere. And there's a push to quantify absolutely every decision with cold, hard data. And that means that designers need to expand their skill sets yet again and have a fluency with data of all stripes. So this includes the qualitative data that's been a part of our practice since forever, things like user research and interviews. But now we're also expected to be masters of the quant. And this is what I'm going to focus on today and what I'll mean from here on out when I say data. So pretty much all product companies today are gathering analytics in some form. And more of them are venturing into the world of A/B testing. And even if you had the luxury, as I did when I worked at Facebook, of being able to use actual data analysts who are really very knowledgeable about this stuff, designers still no longer get a pass for not speaking data. And when I talk to others in my field, I hear the same sentiment over and over. We are super excited to have the data at our disposal. We acknowledge that design feels subjective. It is subjective. And sometimes it's very hard to defend our decisions on their own merit, right? But you add in some data, a little sprinkling of numbers, and now designers know with precision whether their designs are performing on the stated goals for the product and company. We understand that data makes us better designers, creating better products, right? But we feel conflicted. And yeah, a lot of this is an ego thing, right? Because it is very humbling to see a design that you really believed in, you thought it was going to kill it, just face plant in a test decisively. There can be no doubt. Even though you know it's informed by years of your professional experience. But beyond that, we feel the data is given weight that is simply disproportionate to its value in creating quality products. It's seen as a panacea. It's like the Holy Grail. And in my experience, very often it is the loudest voice in the room. So now we're ready to fight. We've lost battles because numbers weren't on our side. We've seen optimizations take very carefully considered design systems and Frankenstein them into something completely unrecognizable. And most of us have had this experience, if you work with data long enough, of having the random dude in the corner who's like, oh, as long as we're at it, why don't we test my idea too? Kind of shoving aside the design process as irrelevant. And if random dude's idea wins, people may wonder, you may wonder, why are we spending so much money on design anyway? So as a colleague at Facebook said, in this industry, often the measurable things are made important rather than the important measurable. So designers, this is our battlefield here. As I mentioned, working at Facebook, there's probably no better environment to understand the impact of data at scale. So 1.2 billion monthly active users, 750 daily active users, 750 million people log onto Facebook every damn day. I still kind of can't get my head around that number. Let's say a product team wants to roll out a feature to a subset of those users, let's just say 200 million, right? And to roll out a little test to 1%, and that's 2 million people that see that. So it is very difficult to argue with the statistical significance of 2 million. And ignoring data in that environment is unthinkable. But I am of the belief that data is not all it's cracked up to be, and that designers need help in making the case for design over data. And drawing from my own experience and speaking with colleagues and friends from my 15 years in the industry, I'd like to humbly demonstrate why sometimes data is full of shit and what you all can do about it. But before I do that, I want to take a little detour into the future. So maybe some of you are a little bit skeptical here. You know, you and data have a good thing going. It's like collaborative, feels very balanced. But I'm going to posit that it will be harder to maintain that balance in the future. So I believe a couple of things are going to happen that will radically change the products that we work on and how we design and use data. So to sum it up on a high level, we'll have access to more and deeper analytics, and customization will go bananas. So allow me to elaborate here. As we all know, we are contributing to a vast ocean of data. Our credit card purchases, the songs we play on Spotify, our Foursquare check-ins, just kidding, our supermarket saver cards. All of these things are collected, and although some of them are attached to our names and our unique identities, more often it's anonymized and used to create patterns about us, or rather people like us, right? So now sensors and other technologies are also gathering data and adding different types to the mix. So for example, the biodata from your Fitbit, car information from your car about your driving habits, your home's energy usage, contextual data like weather and time of day, and maybe even medical data. And these data streams currently don't talk to one another, But in the future, or they don't talk that much, but in the future, the silos that separate them will be drawn together into interesting new products. Like that's part of innovation, to call on Eric's talk this morning. And although we wouldn't choose to make these data sets public per se, we would be willing to give access to individual companies or allow applications to talk to one another because of the benefits that we perceive, right? So discount on your car insurance, a customized shopping experience in pursuit of a truly quantified self. And right now, the way that we're analyzing this is in clicks and conversions, right? Broad demographic segmenting. And this is baby steps. We're still in kindergarten. In the future, the data will be analyzed in combinations that will create increasingly sophisticated patterns. And this is key, predictive models. It's starting that way, but it will really arrive in the very near future. So to illustrate this, let's say you have an e-commerce site. And you see that putting shoes on the homepage leads to increased conversion. Well, you dig into that metric a little bit, you segment it out, and you see that the lift is actually mainly coming from women aged 18 to 24, right? Not to play into stereotypes or anything. And like most companies, you have the ability to turn that data into a customization so that women 18 to 24 see shoes on the homepage, but other demographics see other products. So far, this is super elemental. Amazon's been doing this forever, right? But what if those slices get tiny and infinitely matrixed, taking into account all those other streams of data that I mentioned? So that the things that you see on your homepage is not only determined by your purchase history and maybe kind of a broad demographic profile, but takes into account whether you exercise that day, whether the sun is shining outside, and changes in real time. So maybe it's easy to think of a computer kind of stepping in to decide what goes on the homepage for all these tiny little conditionals and demographics, right? But what if those customizations extend beyond content into interfaces and even functionality? Okay, here's a hypothetical, but imagine that on your e-commerce site, on the checkout flow, you find that requiring payment info first converts better for a 3% tiny little segment, while the rest of the users convert better when shipping info is first. Or that on a music site, Janelle Monáe fans are more likely to share a playlist when the button is here as opposed to here. So in a typical A/B test, we're asking which performs better, and then we choose a winner. But what if the answer is all of the above? So I believe that these customizations will have enough ROI that people will be interested in doing them, right? But how are we going to design for this? As a friend and colleague said, designers will need to design with the same kind of systems employed by gaming. That makes sense to me. I think we'll definitely move more and more into systems and frameworks. And it kind of reminds me of how back in the day we were working on linear and page-based models, and we've all moved to nonlinear app structures. But I think this is going to be harder. And beyond wondering how we'll design, we may wonder, will we design? Will human design instincts even be valuable in the future? Never short on opinions, a friend of mine says no. We could be 30 to 40 years from the end of our profession, reduced to glorified requirements gatherers. So at least we have glory, right? I would actually put this number a little bit lower, but that's just me. There are definitely a lot of supporting cases for this, but here's Exhibit A. So Project Dreamcatcher. This is a CAD system that automatically generates thousands of design options that meet all of your specified high-level goals. So does this mean that industrial designers should fear for their jobs? Well, no, because it doesn't replace the designer. It just gives them more free time. So don't worry. We know this won't happen to UX. We're at least 20 years out. All right, so back to the task at hand, which was telling you about data. I do want you to know. Maybe you're like me and you think you know data, that data would never lie to you. Especially not about doing shots of Fireball with Jessica last Thursday after work. Like I wouldn't find out about that. Convenient omissions and half-truths. I mean, this is really what I've come to expect. But I want you to know so you can consider yourself warned. First of all, data is not neutral. Many of us labor under the assumption that because data is a scientific tool, that it is a paragon of objectivity. But I want to say that data is not absolute, it's not neutral, and it's not objective. And maybe we can't blame data for this because data is not neutral because we are not neutral. We humans are the ones deciding what data to collect, how to go about collecting that data. We're the ones who create tests, we're the ones who draw inferences, and then we're the ones who create stories about the data and go and influence how it is perceived and acted upon. So as a data scientist at Facebook told me, you can make data say anything you want it to. And I would thank him for also pointing me to another quote in a similar vein from an economist: if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. So the point is not that data should be consciously manipulated. That is not in our best interest as product teams. But the way that we torture the data is with the biases that we bring, whether they're unconscious or uninformed. Those biases manifest in how we're collecting and acting upon the data. So let me give you an example of that. Sometimes incomplete data can show a bias. So one example of this is with an app called Street Bump. So this is an app that was created by the city of Boston, and it uses smartphones' accelerometers to automatically record potholes so that city crews can come out and fix them, right? But the obvious flaw here is that only areas with high smartphone concentrations will the potholes be reported. So if you were to look at that data set and think that it was neutral and complete, you might infer that there are no potholes in poor neighborhoods or neighborhoods with elderly. And I'm betting that's not the case. So here's another one. Data can also demonstrate bias when it's read in isolation. So I was having dinner with my kids the other night, and I have 11-year-old twins, and somehow we ended up talking about the topic of poverty, right? And they asked me, what is the poorest state in the U.S.? So we talked about it a little bit, and we came up with our guesses. And I whipped out my phone, I got on Wikipedia, and I found that our nation's capital has the highest rate of poverty, with over 20% of the population there living below the poverty line. So that's pretty sad. So we talked a little bit more, and they said, well, then what's the richest state in the U.S.? So again, we made some guesses, and I pulled out Wikipedia, and we find that, amazingly, there's D.C. again, tied at number 4 for highest income per household. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's probably politicians and lobbyists, so we had good conversations about that as well. But the point is that both of these things are true and theoretically neutral, right? But the real story is in between these data points, not the points themselves. So to me, data points are like words, and it's up to us to construct the sentences. So back to the world of product development. Data is contextual and illustrates a moment in time. So time frame is very important to understanding data, because a period examined can be too short to indicate a trend, or it can be too long and the data just kind of flattens out over time. And then there can also be external factors happening that can distort your results. So while something may be true for that moment, you can't necessarily extrapolate it into the truth, right? So I interviewed a friend for this talk who works at Indiegogo, and she was telling me that they were seeing remarkable spikes in traffic around the time that they released a new feature. They were really excited, but unfortunately, it wasn't the feature that was pulling in all the traffic. It was an internet phenomenon known as the potato salad Kickstarter, which led lots and lots and lots of people to Google crowdfunding and end up on their site. Or what about the visceral reaction that people have when something they're accustomed to using changes? We may have seen this at Facebook a time or two over the years. There is an adoption period to the release of any new feature. And if you were to react to the feedback that you get initially, you would assume that everything you do is a failure. It's only after a period of time that you can really understand whether something is successful or not. So in summary, I would call data a lot of things, right? But neutral would not be the first one that springs to mind. Up next in The Secret Life of Data, data is a master of misdirection. So the way many of us use data in testing is in a really targeted way, monitoring specific metrics. But if you only focus within that circumference, you may miss something really big. And that's because products are systems. They're not a series of isolated elements. And even though one metric may move in the direction that you want, you still need to step back and to closely monitor the rest of the system to understand what else is really happening. So you can imagine that in a product as big and complex as Facebook, that it's an incredible challenge to monitor all the parts of the system when we do a test in one. So a team may make a small change to the news feed, and then suddenly check-ins go down, or photo uploads plummet, right? Something seemingly unrelated. And both understanding those anomalies and getting to the bottom of why they're happening is an incredible challenge. But data is not only shifty, data is cold, man. I'm not saying he kicks puppies or anything, but he is emotionally unavailable. Quantitative data gives us numbers that are very satisfying, but not everything can be measured. Sentiment, feeling, frustration, trust, none of these things can be measured. Well, yet, anyway. And the decisive numbers that data gives us do not show emotion at work. So I would imagine a lot of you have seen this. This is the Feltron report. An information designer named Nicholas Felton publishes a yearly report where he quantifies some aspect of his life in great detail. And last year, he looked at communications. This is just one page of a multi-page report. And Felton is a very gifted designer. And I understand how weirdly gratifying it can be to analyze your life in this detail. I think one year he counted the number of lattes that he drank and number of taxi rides that he took. But to me, this also highlights how data can sometimes just be a curiosity. Now, I know this is a design exercise, right? It's not meant to be actionable for me. But still, I look at this and I say, well, what insight can I draw from this? I see data, but what insight can I draw from this? He gets a lot of mail. But do we know how that makes him feel? Is it too much or is it too little? Is it with the right people? Does it make him happy or does it make him want to kick a puppy? The emotion is completely drained from this report. And I'm especially conscious of the limitations of quant because so much of the work that I've done over the years has been in the area of money-related products and services. So at Facebook, I worked with payments and commerce, and before that, I've worked with financial services and investment firms, and I've also worked with a few startups over the years that were dedicated to helping people better manage their money. And And I can say with conviction that for most people, money is fraught with emotion. People worry about budgeting. They worry about not having enough money. They have concerns about privacy and about other people knowing how they spend their money. They fear fraud and hackers, and have a very justifiable skepticism about any company handling their data with care. I have sat in usability tests, and I have seen a button label cause utter panic, and I've also seen like a tiny little lock icon just make fear magically disappear. So that's why qualitative data is critical to the work done in this area. I've sat through user interviews in my career, and I've heard the most fascinating stories of people and their relationship with money. So people have unique and very complex motivations for all of their financial choices. And interesting, although sometimes wildly inaccurate mental models about how these systems work, about how credit card info is stored or how a transaction happens. And then to further complicate things, they have a completely different attitude in a business context as opposed to a personal one. So spending money on advertising is a business decision, but buying in-game credits in Candy Crush is a personal one. So you can't necessarily apply the same thinking or research or interfaces to those sets of problems. So trying to create a great product in this area could never be done with just quant. All right, so lastly, I'm going to bring out the big guns. Data has no conscience. So this is where I am going to tiptoe into the ethical debates about data, because as a former Facebook employee, I know that there have been a share of controversies with Facebook and data. And I would rather French kiss the scorpion than wade into that controversy here. Suffice it to say, things look very different from the inside when you understand intention, and from the outside, things are sometimes overblown and distorted, right? So moving on, let's talk about other areas of technology where ethics and data are concerned. There's an effort called the Durkheim Project. And this aims to use machine learning to identify suicide risk among U.S. veterans. So veterans have an alarmingly high suicide rate. It's about twice that of the general population. And this project brought together big data companies, universities, government institutions to create, to analyze veterans' social media posts with their consent. It's an opt-in program with the purpose of finding the markers of suicide. And they're using linguistic and sentiment analysis. It's not just keywords, and it's getting really, really accurate. So that's an amazing application of technology and clearly of life-saving benefit, right? So we can all get behind this, right? No? I think you guys have a little afternoon coma thing going on here. I didn't want to have to do this, but it's time for audience participation. Everybody needs to stand up. I'm going to make you all stand up. And do you know how many years I've been waiting to use that fireworks transition? Come on. All right, so the Durkheim Project, which I just mentioned, okay, collects data from social media. It's opt-in. It's used to reduce suicide. If you think this is an ethical use of data, stay standing. If you have concerns that it's unethical, sit down. Okay, interesting. All right, let's talk about marketing. I am sure you've heard the story of Target about how they knew a woman was pregnant before she told her family, just because of the purchases she's made. So I dug in a little bit more. I think it's actually an urban myth, or it's, again, blown out of proportion. These things happen. But predictive analytics are a thing. So this is totally possible. So I'm keeping Target up there. So my question to you is, a company infers a sensitive, potentially private condition about you from your purchase history, and then they market products to you related to that condition. If you think that's ethical, please stand. If you think that's unethical or you have concerns about it, please sit down. Okay, interesting. All right. What about this one? What if a beer company uses data profiling on social media to find the markers of alcoholism and avoid marketing to those people? Either because of sheer altruism or maybe to avoid liability. Okay? If you think it's ethical, please stand up. If you think it's unethical, please sit down. Interesting. All right. Okay, here's my last question for you. If you found it uncomfortable to draw your ethical boundaries in front of your peers and colleagues, please stand up. And if you're totally okay with it, sit down. All right. Thank you very much for humoring me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Everyone can sit down now. So let's look at it from another angle. Data has no taboos. So OkCupid has been gathering data for the last 10 years. They just released a book recently about the insights they've uncovered in that time, highly recommended. And they've seen some really interesting patterns related to racism and sexism and other things that we're kind of uncomfortable talking about. And the data illustrates the difference between what people say and what they actually do. Kind of what we want to be and what we actually are. But data doesn't care about being politically correct, and it doesn't care about making you uncomfortable. And where I'm going with all of this is that with the new capabilities for analytics, all of this creepy or controversial or unethical data is coming your way. Okay? It's not going to be someone else's problem. You will deal with it as a designer. And you'll reveal insights about your customers that may take you into ethical gray areas. So what are you going to do about that? And what are we as an industry going to do about it if it's uncomfortable to have a conversation about ethics in a more public forum? Something to think about. Data won't draw ethical boundaries. We are the gatekeepers. All right. So now that we pulled back the mask on data, and I think you can see he done you wrong. Yeah. But he wants to get back together and hopes that you'll make a little room in your heart for him. Because he's sorry, baby. He really is. And even if you think you can keep him in line, it's actually his friends, the data-driven companies, that are the enablers. So how will designers cope? I believe designers need to be fluent in data, but we also need to understand where data excels and where our human and design perspectives are more valuable. So, and we need to share this within our organizations. So here are a few strategies to help you with that argument. First of all, don't confuse data with insight, and don't let your team members do it either. So I hope it's been clear throughout that the subtext of my entire talk is that data is raw material. It needs to be cooked and seasoned in order to produce insights, which can then, in turn, create great design. This is synthesis. This is humans' home court advantage. So I also think this is where UX designers will avoid obsolescence in the future. Data is often diagnosing the symptom, but not the disease. Data is the what, but not the why. And that is one of the keys to getting insight as opposed to data, is asking why, again and again and again. So this button label performed better than that one? Awesome. Why? Was it confusion or connotation? Drop-off was 12% higher when we asked for an additional form field. Okay, great to know. Why? Is it friction? Is it fear of fraud? Finding out the why is what will make you a better designer, not the data itself. And ignoring the whys can lead you to build these optimizations that get further and further from a product strategy and end up optimizing you onto an island. Next, design your data. So One of the reasons that designers appreciate the chance to use data is that it helps us design for people who are not us. But then we fall into the same trap of collecting data and running tests that match our biases and assumptions. So we end up with misleading or meaningless results from that. So all of the tests that we do should be carefully considered. And even though time is short, we should consider these things design exercises unto themselves and worthy of dedicated thought. Some ways to design your data. So establish clear goals for your test, right? Know what data you want and why. Identify your biases. Notice I don't say eliminate your biases because that is impossible, but mark where they are and account for them and minimize them where able. Make sure you're trying to get the whole picture. Isolate your variables. So, this is pretty basic. Generally, you want to test one thing at a time. But consider the context of the world outside your product as another variable. Think potato salad. And lastly, segment appropriately. Aggregates in general are a nightmare, and it's very hard to draw insight from that. So we all know the 5 whys. A way to accommodate this could be asking the 5 whos. So the next one may be unexpected, but it's a big one, is define quality. So I feel confident in saying that data can't measure quality. We know that delight, flow, the feeling that you get from engaging with a well-crafted product that you feel that has been designed right down to the very last detail, that can't be measured with data, but those are the things that create meaningful and lasting relationships between people and products. But here's the rub. Quality is subjective, and it's difficult to define. So it's also part of the long game, right? It's not something you do once. It's something you attend to every single day. And maybe it feels like right aligning those buttons are not going to move a metric. And as a result, it's hard to find development time for things that people see as non-essential. But it can change if quality is a core metric for your company. Facebook actually did this. So not that long ago, a group of designers formed an initiative. They went out and they interviewed a bunch of stakeholders in the company, and they created a shared definition of quality and a shorthand way to communicate it. They came up with a variation of the useful, usable, desirable framework that most of us are familiar with. And then they socialized it with posters, with workshops, and with lots and lots of conversations, making sure that the entire company was viewing products with the same standard of quality in mind. But ironically, since since quality can't be measured, it's not like we can point to a metric and say, this was very successful. But I can say in my own experience that I saw a shift in the conversation and a better shorthand for talking about quality with others in the company. And then it did lead to noticeable results. Lastly, don't be exclusive. So quantitative data should be just one of the tools in your toolbox. It should sit alongside user research, interviews, gut instinct, professional intuition, even genius design, and more. And don't worry if data gets a little jealous, because if he liked it, then he should have put a ring on it. Okay. That's it. I am Danielle, and if you have a drunk data story to tell me, I would love to hear it. We have a little bit of time. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yeah?
Give examples where you use quantitative to inform your qualitative research. You started with quantitative findings, and then you went into, so medical did a what, and then you went into finding out the why, and looking at those together.
Where quantitative came first and then qualitative?
Yeah.
Well, you know, in my time at Facebook, quantitative data was just kind of everywhere, right? So any sort of thing that we put out, we were pretty easily able to draw upon those numbers. We did work with data scientists, and so we could run little tests and find out what was going on. Additionally, I worked with a researcher there, and that's a part of all of their product teams, and this person was dedicated to not only doing like ethnographic research and kind of, you know, the broader user research, but also usability tests and understanding how things were performing in real time. So there very often were these kind of two sides of the coin, or I felt like I was flanked, right? Because there was design, and then I had the data scientist kind of feeding me numbers, and I had my researcher who was kind of giving me other insights. So. Yes?
Can you elaborate a bit more about, you know, you were saying about the future is, you know, game design and things like that. Are you talking about, like I come from the gambling industry, and so I find in the gaming industry they pretty much they almost force you to make a choice and say that behavior. So you press, oh, I know that you're this kind of, you like leaderboards, or you like competitive nature. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about?
The way, yeah. So she asked. She asked what I meant when I said that we would have to borrow more from gaming design and doing more like systems and frameworks. And the way that I'm familiar with it is that some of this design actually happens like in a spreadsheet. You know, it's understanding conditionals. It's a much more modular approach to design instead of where we tend to be very holistic and we are designing kind of layout and there's a component of that, but then there are so many things that are shifting that you can't know that the thing that what the thing you're designing might actually look like for the end user because there are so many possibilities. So I've never worked in the gaming industry, but what I've seen is that they're designed in modules, and then there's lots of kind of spreadsheeting, you know, trying to understand all the variables and how they fit together. Yes?
I just have a comment. I just want to say how much I appreciate this discussion because I'm working with a team at Microsoft that is motivated and inspired by the new CEO that wants a data-driven and customer-driven company. And I'm a UX researcher, definitely strong in the qualitative research. And I've got this team of the engineering team that's really excited about being data-driven. And some of the data is coming from some of the PMs. And so our teams have a monthly sharing of data. And the large survey data or the other the quantitative data that comes from large numbers is definitely highlighted more. I have a harder time I'm struggling with making sure the research I'm doing is valuable and has a place. And so I just really appreciate this because this is exactly the fight that I'm doing. So.
Right. Thank you. And I think we have time. Yep. Go ahead.
So that reminded me. So what do you do when you're faced with a data set from a group that you know has their own intentions, like product management or something? And do you have any tips for how to maybe push back a little bit, or do you have to go out and build your own data set to confirm what they've given you?
Well, you know, in typical fashion, I'm going to say it depends, but I feel that one of the best ways to address situations like that is to up-level a little bit, right? So talking about strategy, talking about quality, talking about things that are a level higher than what the data is telling is sometimes a way to get alignment, because when you get in those situations where you're just measuring like A and B and looking at metrics, then it's hard to escape that into like what's really the right thing. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Thanks so much.